Well, I'm in Pennsylvania here and my truck broke down. It's over in that shop there getting fixed. It's going to take several days, so I'm in a hotel room and we might as well do an update on our dowsing research. There were three things that had caught my attention that I wanted to know about the dowsing. Most importantly, number one, what is the matrix column? This column, if I'm going for gold, you got this column that comes straight up, and this is what, when people are dowsing, this is what they're looking for. The dowsing rods will put out a horizontal tracking field, and they will hit this matrix column, and that is where people know where to start digging for whatever they're after. Then the other one is, what is a dancer? Why do some fields that move around squirm all over the place? And then what is the Dawkins effect? How come if I come to where a matrix column is and I say this is not real, it'll disappear? However, if I come to a dancer and say this is not real, it will not disappear. It will continue to do its thing. And I really didn't have any way of proceeding on this, so I was just praying God help me try to make some sense out of this. And last summer, went into my shed and I had a bag of sand, and this is here to illustrate a bag of sand. It was about that size, 40, 50 pound of bag of Home Depot play sand, and it tends to have a little bit of gold in it, fine flour gold. So I walked over to the bag and I went for a gold reading to see if there was gold in there, because I thought it might be kind of fun to just find out where it was and pick it out, even if it's a small little flake of flour gold. And I got a gold reading. Yay! There's gold in there. And then suddenly it stopped. I thought, what? No gold. Then suddenly it started again. Now I thought, what in the world is going on here? Gold, no gold, what is it? And then I realized as I was moving around that I kept moving the pendulum around, and I discovered I had a dancer. There was a dancing field that was moving over the top of this thing, and I sent the tracking field out, with my left hand, and it was, sure enough, it was squirming all over the place here. I thought, well, this is interesting. I have a captive dancer here. And then I thought, well, where is the gold and where is it dancing from? So I took the bag, put it on its side, and I found that the flake of gold, it was somewhere about in here, and it was still dancing, but it was dancing less. I thought, well, this is interesting, because there's less sand between here and the gold. It is dancing less. And here it is, when it's standing up and the dancing field is rising up, there's more sand and it's dancing more. So that confirmed to me, that the size of the dancer does have a lot to do with the depth of the soil. But okay, I thought, here I've got a captive dancer. Let's try to figure out something to do with it, how to study it. Now, it's almost 5 o'clock. It's hot. My wife's about ready to call me in for dinner. I'm trying to figure this thing out. I'm getting absolutely nowhere. I'm sweating. Mosquitoes are starting to come into the shed where I'm at, and I'm getting miserable. I'm getting frustrated. And I had held up my hand. I said, okay, field, come to my hand. And nothing. It just kept dancing all over the place. And I thought, well, let's try this shape. Field, come into my hand. Come to me. Come into my hand. Nothing. Just kept dancing all over the place. So I tried pointing my hand, and nothing. It just kept dancing. How about this way? Nope. And how about this way? Nope. So I'm frustrated, and I just think, I'm thinking, field, come to me. And I didn't realize it. It was actually serendipitous, but because I was hot and sweaty and mosquitoes were all over me and I was pressed for time and I was frustrated, I had sighed. My throat was open, my mouth was open, and as I was testing this thing, I said, come to me. And I realized that this thing was only dancing now on this part of the bag of sand. I thought, that's interesting. It's only dancing over here. So I thought, well, where is it going? And I followed the field, and it was going right down my throat. Now that scared me. So I kind of stepped back and swooshed the air and shut my mouth. And it's like, because if you ever see like Alien, the movie Alien, or Poltergeist or Exorcist, you don't want any strange fields going down your throat. I thought, okay, this is really interesting, because on the one hand, the one thing that I learned from it was I had called these fields the matrix column, because they're always straight up and down. They go out the top and out the bottom of whatever you're trying to detect, and they always are straight. This thing wasn't straight anymore. It had bent and was going down my throat. Well, I can't call it a matrix column anymore. So now I call it a marker field, because it is flexible. It will bend. I didn't know that. But then the other thing was, well, I don't want this thing going down my throat. I don't know what it is. Until I figure out what the deal is. And I thought, well, maybe it was the shape of my fingers, the shape of my throat, I mean. So I said, okay, come to me. And then it was back to dancing. And then I thought, well, maybe it's the moisture in my throat. So then I took a rag, got it wet, and I held it in my hand. And I said, okay, come to me. And the field came into the rag. But then I noticed sometimes it would and sometimes it wouldn't. And I found out it had to be with the spacing of my fingers. I had to have my fingers spaced fairly evenly in there for it to work. And I thought, okay, this is interesting, because when I do my ion testing, the field will radiate 6 inches from my hand. But in order for this to work, I had to have my fingers fairly evenly spaced, so it only has like 2 to 3 inches. So the ion field can run out 6 inches, but this field that we're dealing with here only runs about 2 to 3 inches. And I found out too that if I run wire in here, make it like a wire ring, and it can be copper or any wire, that it would help it so I don't have to keep my fingers so evenly spaced. But the other thing that was fascinating to see there, and I'm going to make another video on that called spirit field research, is that if I held the ring in my hand and thought come to me, it would then come into the ring. My thoughts were actually going into the ring and causing this field to respond. If I said don't come to me, then the field would just dance all over the place like normal. So this was fascinating to discover that the depth or the size of the dance did have to do with the depth of the soil or the earth. And down here there was less depth. And even when I tried the Dawkins effect on it, it didn't affect it at all. The dancing was impervious to the Dawkins effect. Now the next thing that I wanted to know was if I had to have my mouth and throat open all the way for my commands to come out into whatever the field this is, and for that marker field to go down my throat, the question is, what is the size of the opening that is required? So to work on this, what I did is I took fender washers. Now if you're familiar with washers, here's a normal shape of a washer. Fender washer, though, has got the same center opening as something like this, but it's got a lot more metal. And I had several sizes of fender washers as far as the openings were concerned. You talk about being glad that no one was around when I was doing this. Not only was I swinging a pendulum, but I also was sticking washers in my mouth. But I started out with the smallest hole washer that I had, and I would put it in my mouth, and I'd make sure that my throat and teeth and tongue and everything were out of the way. And I would give the command for the field to come, and I was actually using penny to get the copper, so I was reading the copper field, and I couldn't get anything to work. So I next size washer, nothing would work. Next size washer. Finally, I got the thing to work and measured the inside of it, and it was a 1/2 inch. And so I thought, well, this is fascinating, because I didn't know if the 1/2 inch opening was the size needed to get my thoughts to come out, or the field to come in, or maybe it was the same type of field that required the same size of opening. So what I did then was I took a cottage cheese container like this, and I took the lid on it and cut a 1/2 inch opening in the lid. And so when I read for copper, I get the copper marker out of there. Okay, and then I thought, well, let's exact this. Let's start closing this off a little bit. And so if I took and closed this off just slightly, it wouldn't come out. Open it, it would come out. Close it, it wouldn't come out. I thought, well, okay, this is fascinating. And one thing I discovered when I was doing some of my research was when I came upon a dancer field, I discovered that if I took crystals and laid them in the grass where the field was dancing, that it would dance a lot less. Somehow it had an effect upon the markers. So I took a crystal and put it on there to see if it would affect the size of the hole needed for the marker field to get out. And it was fine. Closed it, it was coming out. Closed it, it was coming out. Closed it, it was coming out. Closed it down to just a wisp of an opening, just small down there. I don't know if you can see that. And it was still coming out. Any closer than that, and it would not come out. I thought, this is really fascinating. That the crystal, I don't know if it changes. I don't know if this field has lubricity, that it would change the effect of lubricity or viscosity or the velocity. I don't know, but by the crystal being present, the thing needed just a little bitty opening, and that explains why it would dance less with a crystal, is because it didn't need the half-inch opening area to work with. I even tried calculating the area in there and then cutting it into a rectangle like this. Got the exact same effect. So it's not the size of the hole or the shape of the hole. It actually has to do with the area of the hole. And then I also went and put the crystal away, and I took gold, and I found out that by using gold under it, that even if this thing is closed, that the field would rise up through a closed lid if there is gold nearby. Now this is 24 karat plated playing card, but even a ring of gold will work. But when I tested the Dawkins effect, when using the gold, if I said this is not real, the field, even though it, I don't know if it came through or not, but there would be no field. If I said this is real, then it would appear again. This is not real, it would disappear. So interesting that the gold has a direct effect on this, but yet the Dawkins effect, I don't know if it affects it here or down in the cottage cheese container, I don't know. And then I thought, well, this is interesting. I wonder, since this field requires a half-inch opening without the crystals or without the gold, I wonder if the Dawkins effect also requires is area specific and requires a certain area. So what I did is I took the crystal back, put it on there, and I closed this thing down, and I said, this is not real. And the field kept coming out. This is not real. I opened it up just slightly. And the field kept coming out. Opened it up more. This is not real. The field kept coming out. And when I got halfway open, when I got to the halfway mark and said, this is not real, the field quit coming out. So I thought, this is interesting, because it appears that the Dawkins effect is like a mesh that runs on a 1/4-inch screen, whereas the marker fields are a mesh that runs on a 1/2-inch screen. There's actually a size dependency on here. And I thought this is very, very fascinating, because when I was trying to figure out the dancing field, if I've got, excuse me, if I've got gold here, the marker will start to appear above and below it, and then the field will spread out, looking for that 1/2-inch area that it needs to make its way to the top and to the bottom. And this is why if the dirt is shallower, the dancing field is not as wide. But anyhow, it gets the 1/2-inch area that it needs and works its way up. I also discovered through experimentation that this field runs over the surface of metals. And so if you got a lot of iron or tin or copper or zinc or nickel in the soil, it will try to run over the surface of those, and that can actually slow it down and make the field wider and dance more, because it has more metals to run over the surface of. But when you get to the top here, if you've ever seen a propane fire pit, where they put tubes with holes in them under sand or rock, and they dump propane in there, when the gases rise up to the top, You light them, and you get a dancing flame. The flame will dance, and it appears to me that this is what is happening. When the marker field that's dissipated, trying to get that half-inch opening, gets to the top, it reconstitutes itself like a dancing flame. And wherever it reconstitutes itself, then you get the marker field going straight, impervious to the air, going straight up. But this field, like a dancing flame, will dance all over the place like this. And that's what creates the dancer. And I theorize that the Dawkins effect, which is like throwing down a 1/4-inch mesh, this field is already spread out smaller than the 1/4-inch. So it can actually pass through that mesh, reconstitute itself, and then keep on going. Which makes you wonder, what is the nature of that mesh, and why does it only affect it here at this place and not up here? That is just fascinating for me. But this is why the dancer is impervious to the Dawkins effect, because it has already been spread out smaller than the 1/4-inch spacing. Now, I was curious about the Dawkins effect, if that spread out from the person and it hung around the person like the dirt around pig pen, or whether it was stayed with a location. So what I did is I got out into a parking lot and I set a marker down, and I set another marker out 100 feet. And I used my phone, and I'm going to use this card for the illustration, because I was actually going for the gold that was in the phone. And I went to the first mark here and I tested for gold, and I got the marker for gold out of here, and then I set the timer on the phone, hit start, and I said, this is not real. Checked, the marker was gone. And then I sprinted 25 feet over, checked it again, and I had the reading for gold. And I kept checking it, and eventually what was happening was the field spread, and the field died out. I sprinted to the 75-foot mark. I got the reading for gold, and I waited, and then it died out, went to the 100-foot mark, and that field was spreading. And at 50 seconds, at the 100-foot mark, the marker for gold disappeared. Now, my calculations said that that's about 1.5 miles an hour. So I went and redid this thing several times, did the exact same thing. I said, this is real to negate the Dawkins effect. Started the thing up again, and sure enough, got the exact same results. At 50 seconds, the field out here would disappear. It took about 2-3 seconds from the time I noticed that it was starting to go till it was completely gone. So, which is fascinating, that the Dawkins effect is geographically affected. It goes into the area where it is spoken, spreads out at 1.5 miles an hour. Well, this takes us back to the initial dowsing test that Dawkins had set up, where he put the bottles of water inside containers to have dowsers come in and find the containers. Now, when I try to find water inside of a bottle using the markers, I can't get anything. Now, if I get within 6 inches, I can actually detect the ions of hydrogen and oxygen. But if I look for the markers of water or hydrogen and oxygen and the lid is on the bottle, I can't get anything. Maybe somebody else can. I cannot. I can get the antimony in the lid. I can get the elements that are in the plastic because they're exposed, but because the thing is sealed tight, I cannot get the water or the elements in the markers. Now, the other thing is that if the lids were off of those bottles, there still would not be any reading, because as Dawkins is setting up this entire operation, he's mouthing off. He's saying, this is a bunch of nonsense. I'm going to show you this is a bunch of nonsense. We're going to set this up. We're going to embarrass all these people. This is a bunch of hooey. This is not going to work. This is all baloney. There is no supernatural. And so he's setting out the Dawkins effect, contaminating the area, throwing down that 1/4-inch mesh. And so along come these dowsers who are looking for the markers. There are no markers. The markers cannot get through that 1/4-inch mesh. And the dowsers are not used to working around a contaminated area, so they do not know to negate this. They're going to have to say, this is real. This is real. There is, this is all true. This is real. This is not hooey. This is real. To negate the Dawkins effect. So here we have the situation where the Dawkins effect spreads out at 1.5 miles an hour, and with his research, with his test, a closed bottle, I cannot get a marker. I don't know if you can or not. I cannot get a marker off it. Plus, with the Dawkins effect, the markers would be gone anyway. So just fascinating. Now let's go back to this illustration. Remember I said that let's say this is a gold, it produces the marker field going up and down, and then it dissipates to try to get itself that 1/2 inch spacing to get itself up to the surface, and it runs into problems because of any metals that are in the soil, whether it be copper or lead or iron. It tries to run over the surface of those metals, which causes more of a dissipation, and then it reconstitutes itself at the top. And right here is the point of reconstitution. Just put that right there for the illustration. There's your initial mark, and there's a reconstituted mark here. But the point here is what I found as it runs over the surface of metals. I did an experiment. I took a penny, put it on the ground, and I took a window screen that was fiberglass, put it over the top, and looked for the marker of copper, and it was dancing, and about 1 foot across, which is kind of what I expected it to do. And then I changed screens to another window screen that is aluminum, and I checked. There was nothing coming out from here, and I looked for it, sending out the tracking field, and it was coming up from the edges of the frame. It couldn't get through the aluminum screen. It was coming up around the frame. And so then I lifted the edge of the frame just slightly to see if it would take the uphill run, and it did. It would run to the high end, even if it was just slightly raised, and it would come up that way. Which this tells me, and a lot of times dowsers, if they're going out looking for gold or something else, sometimes they'll run into these fields that are dancing a whole large area. And a lot of it has to do with iron or other metals that are in the soil. It's not a false reading. It's actually, there is something in there, but the dancing field is quite broad. Now, I was looking online, and particularly I saw from the British Society of Dowsers, they were talking about what is called the Bishop's method. And especially for detecting water, you get your primary reading of what you're after, and then you go out and you look for a secondary mark. The secondary mark will give you your depth from here to here. And I went and tested this, and sure enough, that secondary mark, which I will call the Bishop's mark, is there. Just like they said it would be, and it does tell you the depth. But I was trying to figure out what in the world, because this field acts just like this field as far as when I tested it for all the tests I could run it through, but it doesn't dance as much as this one for some reason, and I'm not sure why. But it's possible that from this initial field forming to where it is dissipated to the second spot where it actually is reconstituted, that distance there between initial and reconstituted is echoed out in this distance here. That's what my guess is from here to here. It causes an echo effect out to this distance here. But another thing that the British Society of Dowsers was talking about was one of their people, a Major Crikey, one of their earlier members, discovered that if you take a metal stake and drive it into the ground where you're getting this dancing field, or, like if you're following an underground stream, the marker field for your depth is going to be doing this thing. But if you drive a stake in the ground, then you will get a marker field that will go around the stake. And yesterday I was testing this out, and not only a metal stake, but I even found a wooden stake put in the ground. And apparently what my guess is as the field is reconstituting, it will gravitate toward the highest spot, which would be where the stick is sticking out of the ground, so that this field here is not dancing so much, and the Bishop's mark will then center itself around this. And as I was testing out this theory, that this field, the bishop's mark, actually regulates itself according to this one. What I had done yesterday as I was going out into the field, I found a gold reading that was down in the ground about like that far, and I found in this area a lot of flower gold, and that's probably what I was picking up. And I got the bishop's mark out on it, and then I thought, well, this is a fairly strong reading. I was just curious if I took my rod and I shoved it into the ground, if there was actually a substance down in there. So I figured out what the distance was, and I shoved this thing down in the ground almost to where it hit it. And I had the rod actually sitting just like this, and the bishop's mark was where it was. And so what I did is I took a stick and I put it on the ground to show me where the bishop's mark was. And I thought, well, let's shove this down in a little further. And this time I shoved it down in the ground and inadvertently had turned the handle this way. And when I went to double check the bishop's mark, I was looking for it, and the bishop's mark had moved over here. Thought, wait a minute. It was here at the stick, and now it's over here. And then I thought, wait a minute, maybe it's the handle. So I moved the handle back up like this, and sure enough, it went back to where the stick is again. Moved the handle this way, and the bishop's mark moved over. And then I checked, the marker field was coming up, and it was moving across the surface of the steel and then coming up that way. So the bishop's mark was actually using this distance. Instead of it coming up here, it was coming up here, and the bishop's mark moved over. So that was an interesting thing to confirm, that the establishment of the bishop's mark, at least part of the math is involved, is where the field is reconstituted, where the marker field comes up.